Hey folks, thanks for being here, and it's a special episode. Normally I don't do a live show today, but um, given that there's this Chinese, what we believe is a spy balloon flying over the United States, and everyone's watching it, I thought it'd be important for me to kind of come on and answer questions if anybody has questions. Those of you who know my work know that I've been investigating Chinese espionage all the way back to 2008, so this is just kind of my wheelhouse. Actually, I almost went to Montana this morning. I'm kind of glad I didn't because now this air balloon is already somewhere around the center of the U.S. somewhere. Those of you who let me go over kind of briefly what's happening. Basically, there's an air balloon that is from China. The CCP claims that it's just a civilian air balloon. That's a bunch of nonsense. The Pentagon itself confirms that this is of the Chinese government. They say PRC, People's Republic of China. It's a spy balloon. There's different analysis on how much of a threat it is. Pentagon says it's no kinetic threat, meaning it's not going to like bomb us or something like that. But it is scooping up data, we assume, and this is a surveillance balloon. There's a lot of questions on why they would do this, given the fact that a low Earth orbit satellite could basically collect the same data, which has people believing that maybe it's for something else. I want to just explain to y'all what's happening with this, and then I want to detail kind of how Chinese espionage works, because, you know, again, this is my wheelhouse. I've been researching and investigating Chinese espionage for many years now, going back to my on-the-ground research in New York in 2008. To around 2012, looking into the Chinese spy networks here. You might have seen those reports, for example, of Chinese police operating in the United States. Those are the groups I was investigating and exposing going back many years. So, folks, this is we'll probably go about an hour today, so this will be a more loose format. I have a lot I want to talk about, just kind of explaining what's happening, what Chinese espionage looks like, how it works, and so on. And also, if you folks have questions, just leave them in the chat. I'll get to questions kind of throughout the whole episode. So, yeah, just post your questions in the chat. It helps if you write question first. Otherwise, it's easy for me to miss them. Yeah, and folks, that said, let's get started. So I want to go first off, just an overview of what's happening. Let me show you the Epoch Times reporting on this. Well, actually, let me start off on the Department of Defense, because I want to read to you their statement, and then we'll go into some videos. This is the Department of Defense official statement. It says this: attributed to the Pentagon Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder, the United States government has detected and is tracking a high-altitude surveillance balloon that is over the continental United States right now. It says the U.S. government, to include NORAD, which tracks these kinds of things, continues to track and monitor it closely. The balloon is currently traveling at an altitude well above commercial air traffic and does not present a military or physical threat to people on the ground. In other words, there's nothing that would lead us to believe it's going to like nuke us or, you know, shoot people or, you know, launch a EMP attack or anything like that. Nothing suggesting that, although there are some serious questions on what it is doing there. It says instances of this kind of balloon activity have been observed previously over the past several years, suggesting that the CCP has actually done this before, raising some questions over why didn't we hear more about that. And it says, once the balloon was detected, the U.S. government acted immediately to protect against the collection of sensitive information. A couple hours ago, the Pentagon held a press briefing and they answered some questions. Let me show a clip of that now, and then we'll go a bit deeper into what's happening.
However, the fact is, we know that it's a surveillance balloon, and I'm not going to be able to be more specific than that. We do know that the balloon has violated U.S. airspace and international law, which is unacceptable. And so we've conveyed this directly to the PRC at multiple levels. And in terms of specific locations, I'm not going to be able to go into specific locations, again, other than to say it's moving eastward at this time.
Yeah, folks. Let me show you again. This is from a transcript from yesterday from the Department of Defense as well. Yesterday, the Department of Defense said, according to one of the senior defense officials, there was a question saying, and just one last, Montana's, because originally the reports were this was in Montana. I had crossed over the border from Canada. The CCP sent it kind of through the Arctic region, over Canada into the U.S. It's currently somewhere in the heartland. The Pentagon is not releasing data on its exact location. It's moving very quickly. But when it was still over Montana, they said this. They said that Montana is one of the 3 homes of our siloed nuclear weapons. And people were raising the question of, well, why Montana? And people said, well, Montana is where America's nuclear weapons facilities are located. And they said, was there any concern that the balloon was trying to collect intelligence on those silo fields? The senior defense official replied, stating, yes. So clearly the intent of this balloon is for surveillance. And so the current flight path does carry it over a number of sensitive sites. Now, what they're raising the concern of is that basically this is an intelligence gathering balloon, at least we believe. I mean, who knows if it's doing something else? A lot of people I saw in the comments wondering that maybe it's releasing some kind of, bioweapon or something like that. I wouldn't put it beyond it. Let's put it that way. Who knows? The military does not seem to be overly concerned with it. They're not going to shoot it down. They say shooting it down they risk it crashing somewhere and harming civilians or destroying property. They're pretty much just letting it fly over, and that's kind of where things are at right now. In terms of it gathering up information on nuclear weapons sites, I have 2 different opinions on this. On one side, yes, the CCP would conduct those types of operations. On the other side, it wouldn't really be necessary for them to do this. The United States has been terrible in terms of the security of its nuclear weapon sites. Basically, every single nuclear silo America has is over-targeted. The U.S. adversaries know exactly where they are. They're visible from space. They're not secret. And every one of them, according to people I've talked to, is what you call over-targeted, meaning if there were ever a real war to break out, they'd be some of the first targets. Our adversaries know the exact locations of them. That was one of the reasons why America was actually going to start they called it the Midget Man program. And the Midget Man program was to create miniaturized nuclear weapons. They almost moved forward with it. They never ended up developing them. A lot of our adversaries do have miniaturized nuclear weapons, though. Even North Korea has them, which is ridiculous when you think about it. China, the Chinese Communist Party, for example, even has nuclear weapons, including launchers that can basically operate they look like semis, like transport vehicles, like 18-wheelers. The back just pops up, and it's a ballistic missile launch system. That means they can move their nuclear weapons around and hide them. They can even keep them underground and move them out, or they can just make them look like they're disguised as just normal semis. The only thing America has outside of that would be, like, for example, the nuclear submarines or the doomsday jets, which do also have those capabilities. But again, that's a different point from what we're talking about here, which is the over-targeting and surveillance of nuclear weapon silos. They're suggesting it is something the CCP might be looking into. It's not much more of a security risk than we've faced since the Cold War in general. So personally, I doubt that's the real intent they have behind this. Let me show a bit more on this. There you go. It looks like a little moon, right? People were filming it being like, what is that thing? The sun's here, the moon's over there. What is this thing, right? You can see it from the ground, meaning it's pretty dang big. It is very high up in the air, well above even where commercial airlines would be flying. And if you can see it from the ground and it's still that big, well, you can imagine how big the thing is. Epoch Times reports this. I'll go over a couple more reports and I'll go a bit deeper into this. Epoch Times says, Pentagon tracking suspected Chinese spy balloon over the northern U.S. This was earlier today when it was still over the northern U.S. Currently, again, somewhere in the center of the United States. It says the high-altitude surveillance balloon allegedly floated over the Aleutian Islands and Canada before crossing over the airspace of Montana, according to an NBC report that cited 3 unnamed government officials. Now, some people are pointing out that the United States, the Canadian government, was tracking this balloon even before it crossed into Canada, which raised some questions of, well, if you had the option to shoot it down when it was like over the ocean, why didn't you just shoot it down then? And a lot of even Trump is tweeting out or messaging out on Truth Social, shoot it down. The excuse they're using for not shooting it down was risk to civilian populations. Well, why didn't they do it before it was over at the center of the United States? That's a real serious question to be asking. Regardless of that, let's go further in. It says a senior defense official said that the Pentagon leadership, including Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, convened a meeting to determine whether or not the balloon should be shot down, but ultimately decided against that course of action, quote, due to the risk of safety and security of people on the ground from the possible debris field. You shoot something down that high, you are going to have raining debris, and maybe even if it's in a random area, hunter in a field or someone camping out in a field, it does present a random risk, and they seem to believe, based on their assessment, that even that random risk to someone just walking through a field somewhere or wherever else it's at, is not worth the cost of pretty much what this thing can actually collect. They state, continuing, while declining to specify the exact dimensions of the balloon, the official said the Pentagon assessment that the balloon, which is traveling in the atmosphere over U.S. airspace, is, quote, large enough to cause damage from the debris field if we downed it over an area. Now, the official said the balloon's, quote, current flight path does carry it over a number of sensitive sites, again, which raised concerns about the nuclear weapons facilities, and they did not provide detail on that. And they said, quote, our best assessment at the moment is that whatever the surveillance payload is on this balloon, it does not create significant value added over and above what the PRC is likely able to collect through things like satellites in low Earth orbit. The official said, using an acronym for the Chinese regime's official name, the People's Republic of China. And also said, quote, but out of an abundance of caution, we have taken additional mitigation steps. I'm not going to go into what those are, but we know exactly where the balloon is, exactly what it is passing over, and we are taking steps to be extra vigilant so that we can mitigate any foreign intelligence risk. What he's saying basically is this. The balloon poses no military threat, or at least no kinetic threat, meaning it's not going to shoot you, it's not going to drop a bomb, it's not going to do anything that physically harms people. No kinetic threat. And in terms of the intelligence threat, they're basically saying it's not that big of a deal. They're saying a low Earth orbit satellite could basically collect the same data. The CCP is collecting the same data. Anyways, it's a moot point. It's not doing anything of significance. But then people are saying, well, and there were some even journalists asking this during the press briefings, if it's not for a military attack, if it's not useful for intelligence gathering, and it's really visible, then why the heck are they doing it? And they're doing this right as Blinken is going to China for a big meeting. Why are they doing this right now? I can give my personal assessment on that. There's three possible reasons. One possible reason is if you take what the CCP is saying at face value. That's already mostly been debunked, and so I'd say it's already a moot point, but I'll say it anyway. The CCP is claiming that this was basically just a civilian balloon that's looking at pretty much weather patterns and stuff like that just flew off course. That's already been debunked. The Pentagon is already stating that it's maneuverable. In other words, someone is actually steering it. So the narrative that it's blown off path is total nonsense. The CCP has already been called out on this, but I'll show you their quote in a little bit anyways. The other side of it, too, is that if you're in China, you're not in you're developing aerospace technologies or things dealing with higher Earth orbit in this case, you're not going to be able to do that as a private citizen. There's no way you could do a program like this in China, build something like this, let alone launch something like this in China, without the CCP taking it over or doing something horrible to you if you were to do it on your own. So it's absolute nonsense, the idea this is a civilian balloon. This is absolutely tied to the CCP, and the Pentagon has already clarified as such. So that number one narrative is off. That leaves two different narratives. One would be that this is basically, one would be the possibility that this does present some kind of real intent. They don't believe it's a kinetic threat. There are different imaging technologies the U.S. could use to, basically detect if there's something being carried on that balloon that would present, say, a nuclear threat or an EMP threat, because that would mean a nuclear device. They're not suggesting anything of the sort, suggesting it's not a kinetic threat. The other possibility is that it's maybe a biological warfare threat or something like that. In my personal assessment, doing something this visible would not be necessary. If they wanted a delivery system for a biological weapon, or even for that matter, like an EMP, it would not take this form. It would probably go in a shipping container, and it would, maybe they drop it off at a U.S. port, and it would be just as effective from that standpoint. Not to mention the U.S.-Mexico border is so completely porous that anybody could come in, and it's very easy to smuggle things across, including biological materials. There was even a recent incident with a smaller transport truck that had nuclear materials on it in the United States. Not a large amount, but these types of things, when you have a porous border like we have, it's not difficult to smuggle things in. If they were to go that route, they wanted to get to the center of like continental U.S. But if you're dealing with biological weapons, ports of entry, for example, even shipping containers, would be just as useful, and you could even infect normal goods with an invisible weapon, i.e. a biological weapon. It would be just as effective. And so I think that's also a moot point. That leaves only one third option. In my personal assessment, take it for what it's worth, my personal assessment is they're doing something visible. They're doing something very visible and very intentional. And when you're doing something like that, it's meant to basically be a fear factor, right? They want to divert either that means they want to divert public attention away from something else. They're raising concerns of a military threat. They're raising concerns of Chinese aggression. They would have assessed that would be the essential reaction when you're dealing with military intelligence gathering. A lot of times there's deep calculation on how a country will react, what are the protocols activated to respond to a given threat, etc., etc. It could be that they're trying to do something very visible, right? They want us to see it, they want us to look at it, they want us to focus on it, and they're doing that very likely for one of two reasons. One would be a psychological warfare or propaganda element, or a fear factor element as Blinken is visiting China, or is just an open threat. Two would be they're actually testing how we're reacting to it, right? Does the United States shoot it down? Where do they shoot it down at? To what extent? What are the different systems activated in the United States to monitor a thing like this? How rapid are the reaction systems to it? And how do you basically manipulate those reactions and gaps within reaction militarily? That would be normal intelligence gathering, and it's possible they're doing it for that reason as well. My assessment would be that it's a combination of those last two factors, both a visible psychological weapon, right, diverting public attention and sending a message, to measuring response times and response protocols of the United States. Those would be the two things, in my opinion, that this would represent, basically. That being said, the CCP Foreign Ministry responded to some of this, and this was the press briefing on February 3rd, Friday, today. This is Chinese spokesperson Mao Ning, and he said this. Let me just show you a video of what the CCP is saying in their official statement.
了解核实情况。我想强调的是，在事实搞清楚之前，猜测和炒作无异于问题的妥善解决。中国是负责任的国家，一贯严格遵守国际法，无意侵犯任何主权国家的领土和领空。关于这个气球的问题，刚刚我已经讲了，我们正在了解核实情况，希望双方能够共同冷静谨慎处理。
All right, so the CCP is lying. Let's just be blunt. This woman is actually lying, and she's already been caught on that. What she says has already been debunked, basically. But this is the official CCP statement. Let me just read what she said in English. She said, "I am aware of the reports and am in the process of understanding and verifying the situation. I would like to emphasize that until the facts are clarified, speculation and hype will not help resolve this issue properly. China is a responsible country that has always strictly abided by international laws and has no intention of violating the territory and airspace of any sovereign country. Regarding this balloon issue, as I've mentioned, we are in the process of understanding and verifying the situation and hope that both sides can handle it together calmly and cautiously. The military has already confirmed this is a maneuverable craft, meaning it is being controlled by someone. The U.S. military has already confirmed as well, including in public briefings, that in addition to being maneuverable, it is of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, meaning this is a military or government balloon, meaning she's lying to everybody right now. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the PRC, of the CCP, also made another statement. This is the Foreign Ministry spokesperson's remarks on the, what they say, unintended entry of a Chinese unmanned airship into U.S. airspace due to force majeure. This is from the CCP actual website. And there's a question here. They say, according to media reports, a Chinese unmanned airship has been spotted in U.S. airspace. Do you have any comment? And the answer was this. The airship is from China. It is a civilian airship used for research, mainly meteorological purposes. Affected by the westerlies and with limited self-steering capabilities, the airship deviated far from its planned course. The Chinese side regrets the unintended entry of the airship into U.S. airspace due to force majeure. The Chinese side will continue communicating with the U.S. side and properly handle this unexpected situation caused by force majeure. This is nonsense as well. They're lying. The U.S. military has confirmed again, this is not a civilian aircraft, and this would only possibly mislead the general public. Anybody who works in national security, anybody who has followed the Chinese Communist Party or its military, knows that there is no such thing as a civilian-run, non-controlled by the CCP aerospace program existing in China, nor would they allow such a thing to ever exist. The Ministry of Science and so on, these types of things are deeply, deeply controlled by the CCP. There's no possible way, in other words, that you could have a civilian aircraft like this that the CCP would not be directly involved with. It is completely ridiculous that anyone would suggest this is real, but of course that is the CCP's official statement. And I'll repeat again that the U.S. military has already basically debunked this. It's total nonsense, absolute nonsense. Yeah, California gal, you're saying, what do you think is on the balloon? A bomb, a nuclear weapon, biological stuff they wanted to dump on us? Can we safely shoot it down? California gal, I do not believe there is a bomb, a nuclear weapon, biological stuff. There is concern of these types of weapons currently. If we're taking the U.S. military's statements on it, they would have sensors that could detect those kinds of things. They are in no way suggesting any of those things are on the aircraft. And again, as I mentioned, if they did want to do something like that, they probably wouldn't use a balloon for it. There are easier ways to do it and less visible ways to do it. And if they did want to bring in, let's say, a nuclear weapon, a bomb, it's risky for them because they had to fly this thing over Canada first, over the ocean first, over Canada, and then into the U.S. Doing something that visible, if they wanted to launch an actual attack, would give too much response time to the United States and to Canada for that matter. And it would be easy to spot from a strategic standpoint, from a response standpoint, and even from just basic sensors. I don't think that's something anybody should be too concerned about. The concern with this, I think a biological weapon is possible, and there is a history to this. For example, you might remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we had some reports talking about Soviet-era war plans against the United States from both the Soviet Union and from the Chinese Communist Party. There were, for example, biological weapons programs developed by the Soviet Union working alongside the CCP, which talked about weaponizing airstreams. In other words, using natural airstreams as a carrier for a biological weapon. The thing is with that, you wouldn't actually, if you wanted to do that, you wouldn't have to use a very visible balloon to do it. You could actually just weaponize the airstream itself. In other words, it would be unnecessary. A balloon would be an unnecessary element in that type of weaponization. The airstream itself could work as the carrier. Not to mention there are other easier ways to do it, such as just, shipping over face masks and infecting them, or doing something else, which give you also plausible deniability. If the CCP were to use a balloon for that, they would lose the plausible deniability element, meaning that I don't think it's any of those things. My personal assessment is this is a veiled threat to the United States. This is them threatening us. This is them making a clear military statement. This is them doing something intentionally very visible. And also in addition to that, is it maybe as a side element to it, they're measuring our responses to a craft like this entering U.S. airspace. They do that all the time with fighter jets, but fighter jets flying this deep into American airspace would be more of an issue than what looks like just a harmless balloon that they can just say, oh, it just blew off course. This is less threatening, while at the same time having the same basic value for them. Lieutenant Navy vet, you're saying, isn't there anything the U.S. Space Force can do to disarm it? So there are a few different things they could do, and which does raise some questions over why they're not doing it. One is they could capture it. That's not outside their capabilities, although that'd be kind of difficult. They could, for example, shoot it down. They're saying they will not do that because it would create debris, and they're worried the debris could actually harm American civilians. I don't fully buy that. There are ways you could control that, and it would just be difficult. There will be some risk, and it seems their basic assessment is the danger the balloon itself poses is not worth the risk. Basically, that the balloon poses such little risk that it's not worth even kind of risking it crashing on someone's house or falling and killing a hunter in the woods or something like that. They don't think it's worthwhile for that. There are electronic warfare capabilities. The Pentagon has said that they do believe this vehicle is maneuverable, given the fact that it's an unmanned vehicle, suggests that there is a remote control element to it. And if you understand electronic warfare, I'm sure many of you do here, you can actually gain control of, for example, a drone or an unmanned device. The U.S. military has very strong technologies for this. It's possible they don't want to demonstrate that because, as I mentioned, the logic I would have of them not doing that, of basically seizing control of the device and forcing it to land, is that they would not want to basically give that information to the CCP. Because if you understand the idea of intelligence gathering, aside from, again, the fear element, the visible fear element of this, which would be a big part, a psychological tool used right ahead of Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's visit to China, which he has now, by the way, postponed. That they would basically, aside from that element, there's the intelligence gathering element. If the U.S. were to activate new technologies, for example, counter-drone technologies, which could force it to land, the CCP could potentially pick up that information, especially using a vehicle like this that's very likely monitoring for electronic signals and so on. They would not want to basically provide the CCP with additional data that would actually benefit it. That's the other side of understanding the way that intelligence gathering would work as well. If there's not a clear danger of something meant to gather intelligence, it is in the host country's interest to not demonstrate their full capabilities. Because, let me step back a little bit. When we understand espionage, there's a few different types of it. When you're dealing with things like this, you're talking about intelligence gathering. A lot of espionage outside of the subversion element or the, let's say, ideological subversion where you're trying to start color revolutions or something like that, outside of that element of espionage, a lot of what it is just intelligence gathering. You're gathering information. The nature of that is imagine every country or every person or everything is basically functioning like a machine, especially when you're dealing with governments or militaries, typically there are protocols of reaction to incidents. There's, especially in communist countries, if, for example, aircraft flies into airspace, this specific designated department will have to respond. These, two individuals in that department are the ones who are activated. It will take them X number of minutes or hours to respond. The media and the civilian population doesn't become activated in terms of awareness for maybe a couple hours or a couple days. At what point does military leadership respond? At what threshold do they bring in government elements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? When a country gathers this type of data, imagine like they're constructing an algorithm or they're constructing a machine. And if they want to then anticipate how a country will react to a certain military maneuver, or if they wanted to start a real war or launch a real attack, they could think, okay, if we were to, for example, send an actual balloon into the United States and drop a bomb, if they wanted to do that, for example, they would say, okay, let's look at the data we collected previously on how they would react to an aircraft of that type, how long it would react, how long, in other words, how long would we have before these response mechanisms were activated. And essentially, once you construct this machine, essentially, using the intel you've gathered, you can think of it like you drop a ball into a machine, and you can anticipate where that ball will hit on its way down. Intelligence gathering is merely constructing that system and understanding the reaction protocols of something. You can do the same thing with individuals. A person, you might know Uncle Dave is very sensitive to this issue and that issue, and if you touch on those issues, he's going to get very mad. You'll know he's favorable to this issue and this issue, so if you touch on those issues, he's going to get very happy. You might know that he comes at X hour, maybe 5 o'clock every day. He will leave before 9, except on Tuesdays when he wants to, catch his favorite show or something like that. You generally can form reaction protocols and basic schedules of people. That's just how intel gathering works, especially when a country wants to exploit that, either by targeting an individual or targeting a nation. And very likely, again, that's what, in my opinion, the CCP is doing in addition to the psychological element. They're doing something intentionally visible. Now, that being said, I've done a lot of reporting in the past on Chinese espionage, and so I actually wanted to, in this episode, kind of lay out how Chinese espionage works. I know a lot of people are talking now about the Chinese police departments in the United States and other countries. Well, notably, the one in New York has actually been busted by local authorities, so maybe they broke them up. People are talking about TikTok, for example, and the data it can gather on you or your children. People talk, for example, about Huawei and ZTE. There's a lot more to Chinese espionage than just these. Chinese espionage is extremely broad and very aggressive. And again, as a journalist, this has been one of the main focuses of my work, right? Exposing these types of operations. And in fact, I think for a long time, I was one of the few experts on some of these topics. In fact, I've actually taught classes twice at the U.S. Air Force Air Academy. I've spoken at universities, including at Harvard, about this. Maybe when I was perceived as, not being like politically active, I think I do a lot more political analysis these days. But in the past, I've done a lot of events. I've done a lot of speeches. I've actually taught classes on this stuff, and so, this is my wheelhouse basically. Let me detail some of my previous reporting on the different types of tools the Chinese government and Chinese military will use for espionage. And then I'll lay out some of the different military branches and government branches and how they operate in other countries. Because I think this is a good opportunity to kind of introduce some of these concepts to people to help them understand not just what the CCP does, but frankly, the real, in my opinion, extreme danger they present. I will say the CCP is the largest threat to the free world in existence. I know I do a lot on the World Economic Forum. The CCP is more of a threat. They are more of a threat to basic freedoms. They're more of a threat to the future. And frankly, the things they're doing, including through networks of corruption, are utterly horrible, utterly terrible. and unfortunately not very well known. So let me detail some of this. I'm going to go kind of way back in my reporting career. Yeah, pretty far back, in fact. I won't go back to the beginning. I did a lot of my articles on the United Front back in like 2008 to like 2012. I did a lot of reporting on cybersecurity from like 2012 to like 2016. But let me show you some of the different stuff I've worked on, exposed over the years. In 2013, I did this article, and it was, "Is your iron spying on you?" And this was actually about kettles and irons and other devices. You might have seen some of the new articles talking about what they call supply chain threats from China. That within electronic components, the CCP is installing basically systems to spy on you. This raises concerns. This was one of the concerns raised even during the Obama administration when they did analysis on U.S. military equipment, and they found that there were components even in American jets, like our fighter jets, that were coming from China. And the military didn't actually declassify all of that, but one of the concerns raised at the time was basically there are non-functional or remotely accessible components being sold to us by Chinese companies, being used inside our even military equipment in the United States, and possibly government equipment as well. And basically, in a wartime scenario, this would mean they could render our military equipment either non-functional or maybe even turn it against our own troops. That was one of the big concerns with all this. That said, folks, I'm going to cut to Epic TV for the rest of this. So those of you on YouTube, join us on Epic TV. I'll do an hour show today, but I want to go into kind of some of the nuts and bolts of Chinese espionage. Come join us on Epic TV. I'll continue over there. And those of you on Epic TV, thank you for being here as well. Let's cut now, and we'll keep going. Let me show you.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, "Oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China."
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.
Again, folks, that's my documentary, The Final War, which you can actually watch in parts now, exclusive on Epic TV. So if you haven't watched it yet, please do. All right, let's jump over to Epic TV exclusively, and I'll see you there. All right, folks, let me go over some of my previous reporting